The readings today are beautiful readings because it shows the progression of the early church. You know, we hear Peter today speaking to the crowd. He tells about how the progression was that finally brought him to where he was. There were the disciples and all the people that Jesus appeared to, and finally they appeared to him. And it's such a very beautiful response because it didn't happen all of a sudden. Probably the one we think of having that automatic vision is Paul himself. But it's so important that Paul got that response the way he did. Because Paul, in his life, was a very, very vigorous man. He believed in his Jewish faith. He was a man who followed strongly in the Jewish faith. And when he heard that those people called Christians, were following that man, Jesus of Nazareth, he was going to stop it because they knew the Messiah was coming, but that was not the Messiah. And so he was, with the permission from the synagogue, from the Sanhedrin, got permission to go and to stop those people from believing in that man as the Messiah. And he went around from town to town when he heard that they themselves the people were in that town believing in that Jesus of Nazareth as the Messiah. He would bring them into the courts and have them flogged and have him put in prison. All the things possible that could be done to these people who believed in this man, Jesus. And it's just so funny because as you stop and you listen to that and realize that at that time in Paul's life, when he thought he had it all together, on that trip, he was knocked off his horse. And that vision came to him and said, "Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me?" He did not understand what that meant. "Why am I persecuting you? Who are you?" "I am Jesus of Nazareth, the Messiah." And all of a sudden, within a second, he realized that Jesus was the Messiah and that he had gone throughout the country persecuting all those young Christians. But he said to himself, "Now I know he's alive. And now my job is to ask their forgiveness, but also to go into the world and make sure that the rest of the world knows that I missed the Messiah, but don't let them miss the Messiah. The Messiah has come." And so his ministry has been a very, very interesting ministry. The word this past Sunday dealt with that whole thing of Paul having to go now to Jerusalem after he's just persecuted all those people who believe in Jesus, and nobody believes in him. Nobody wants anything to do with him. And as a result of it, finally Barnabas comes and says to the disciples, "This man has been teaching about Jesus. We know he's persecuted all those people who call themselves Christians, all of us. But he has said now through a dream that he has received the word from Jesus. And now I believe he is full of the love of the Lord." And the disciples kind of winced at that for a little bit, and so did everyone else in Jerusalem, because they were not quite sure who this man Paul was. But finally they said, "We'll let you do some ministry." But you know, once he began his ministry, especially in Jerusalem, among all those new Christians there, they didn't want anything to do with him. So Paul realized that the only thing he could do is to go somewhere else and preach the good news, especially to the Gentiles, especially to those people who don't even understand who Jesus was, to teach that Jesus was the Son of God. And you see in the gospel readings today where Jesus speaks to the disciples, Philip and James, and says, "Know that I am the Lord. Know that I am the Lord and believe in me. And if you believe in me and follow me, ask what you will and I will do it for you." And Paul began to understand his task was to those people who had never, ever heard of Jesus in any way, shape, or form, to tell them the good news and let Jesus work through him to bring about that good news in their lives. We do say that a lot of the early Christians were really formed as a result of Paul's words. And so we see today a conversion by Paul, and a conversion by the disciples, and a conversion by the Jews who had become Christian, a conversion by the Gentiles, all understanding that Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life. You know, I always have to look at myself, and every time I read this beginning of the church, and how these few men began to preach. And by the way, there were women also, out there preaching the good news to their families, that the church was born. And as you and I sit here today, we sit here as a result of what we just read 2,000 years ago. People who believed that Jesus was the Messiah and wanted to proclaim it to the world. They burned inside with that excitement that the Lord was there and the Lord would do whatever they asked of him. And that's us, to burn inside. You know, as I said yesterday in the homily, you know, sometimes in our life, we need to do a little pruning in our own lives, the same as the apostles had to be pruned a little bit, the same as the early Christians had to be pruned to really come to understand how God works in their life. And even in our life today, that pruning makes us more aware and people able to really serve the Lord more in our lives. And you know, you look at your life. This last year has been a very major pruning, hasn't it, huh? A lot of things have happened this past year. A lot of things that you didn't expect and I didn't expect. But it did have a pruning in our life. And all of a sudden, we couldn't talk to each other. We couldn't touch each other. We couldn't greet each other the way we always greet each other. We could not do so many things. And all of a sudden in our life, we're beginning to be able to kind of, we're past the bumping of arms. Sometimes we actually touch each other because that's the human race. We just have to touch each other. But it was that pruning that all of a sudden made us aware that we are called as Christians, among all the things to happen in our life, to trust in the Lord. And he will guide us in our life, not to be afraid. He is there. And even though we have this pruning in our life, it kind of makes us new in our life, makes us new in our faith, and excited in our faith that Jesus has raised from the dead. And that's why we can say, Alleluia. He is risen. He is indeed. And that's a very powerful word. Let's continue in prayer now. Most loving Father, on this feast of St. Philip and St. James, we come before you. We know how you work through their lives. We've heard about Paul and how Paul began his journey as well, and all those early Christians and all those disciples, how they continue to spread the news even up to this day, and each one of them learning from their experience of how to trust in you. We ask you, Father, now to hear our prayers.